What does it mean for something to cost you? This question is very broad. You may be thinking money, time, people. Well, today we are going to dive into the cost of your yes in regard to what you have to give up, but most importantly, what you gain. Hello, you guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Other Side of Yes podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Oñate, and today I've brought back a special guest that we had for our first episode, and that is Miss Sierra Edmonds.
Hey everyone.
Hi, Miss Sierra. It's good to have you back.
Thanks for
I
having me.
think, yeah. So we did our interview, and then I had one where it was Chantal, and I liked it because it was more conversational. And I was like, you know what? Let me get Sierra on here, and we can have another really good and fruitful conversation. But today, the title of this episode is The Cost of Your Yes. And
Mhm.
I'm really excited to get into this topic, especially because one, I think it's important to know what you're stepping into. I think it's easy um, to look at the Christian life or to look at people who believe in God and to think like, oh, it's just, you just follow him, it's a yes. But I think when you really are able to dive deep into it and get into the nooks and crannies of what it means to say yes to him, I think you begin to realize that it's not easy. You really do have to die to yourself, and you have to make sacrifices and pick up your cross and pick up your cross pick up your cross. And I think it's something that people should be certain of, that it's worth doing. And I think it is. Obviously, like, once you're on the other side of it, it's like, oh wow, like, yes, this has costed me these things, but I've gotten something greater in return. And I think that's one thing that I always say, like, when people sort of ask like where I'm at, or when I first really started pursuing Christ, I always would remember, like, he's too good of a father to leave us empty-handed. So what he
Mhm.
asks of us, he gives us something greater in return. And I think that's just a really good topic to go over, the cost of your yes, because again, it does cost you. It's not just a simple, easy life that doesn't come with suffering. It definitely does. But I think when you're able to see and understand and know who you're saying yes to, I think it makes the cost worth it. So yeah, I'm
Yeah,
excited.
yeah.
So we'll get into our first question, and that is, Sierra, when you said yes to Christ, were you aware of the cost, or did you begin becoming aware as you got to know him? So as you began like your journey and your relationship with him, what did that look like for you in terms of realizing like, oh, what does this cost me?
Um, I think my first response to that question is no. Um, I think we talked about this last time, but I've always been a Christian. I think at times I was more lukewarm. I re-accepted how do I say that? I re-accepted the Lord as my Savior. Um, and I guess back when I was in high school, but I still don't think that I just knew like what all of that entailed. And so
Mhm.
it's funny that we're having this conversation because even this week at work, I was like, oh, like as a Christian, we are different. And I know it sounds weird to say, but we are aliens of this world. And so
Yeah.
in this past week, like I really just I've seen some of the conversations at work, and just the way that maybe my coworkers and I live our lifestyles, or and even just other 26-year-olds live their lifestyles is different than I do. And so even this past week, like I've just grown so much in my faith over the past couple of years. But um, yeah, I think we're just always, as believers, when we live in this world, we're always going to be faced with like situations. Um, and things that may cause tension for us.
Yeah.
Um, but I just, even now, I'm like, I need to stand firm in my faith and like in what I believe. And if
Hmm.
people think I'm weird or crazy for that, then that's okay because I just know like the fulfillment that Jesus brings me. And so I don't want to be a part of anything that'll give me temporary satisfaction. But I mean, I do think that, yeah, I don't think I knew like even at 26 years old and feeling like
Yeah.
I have a foundation, like um, it still is hard and I still have to remind myself to press into and lean into the Lord because if I don't, then um I don't want to stumble or fall into anything that he didn't have planned for me.
Yeah, that's good. I think when you're talking like you referencing to lifestyle is good because I think that's obviously probably one of the biggest changes that people will begin to notice or really cost is like it costs your old self, it costs old routines and habits and patterns. So I guess that's one thing, or that next question that I could have for you is like when it came to your lifestyle, like what was that transition like? Like going from how you once lived to how you live now. Do you think that that was a big factor in what it costed you to say yes to Christ?
Yeah, I I say this as like humbly and like I don't mean it pridefully. Like I don't know that I ever like fell off the deep end,
Yeah.
but I think that I mean, sin is sin. I think I just maybe had some tendencies, and I don't think that my convictions were as strong
Yeah.
as they were back then. And it's like, I may not have been getting drunk or like, having sex, but I think like was like, I think I could see how I was lukewarm in the
Yeah.
past.
Yeah.
So, um, I think that even something, I've been single for a long time is just like no one talks about like purity or what that looks like.
Yeah.
And I think I had the mindset of like, well, growing up, you just hear, we'll just wait to have sex. But no one ever told me like the why, and I didn't understand that for myself. So I think like previously I had the mindset of like, well, if I really love them, like it's fine. Like I know we're gonna be together.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's one thing of like when you're single and in your 20s and guys and girls, like the common thing is like hookup culture and just like to not I think I had no conviction on that previously. And
Yeah.
even back then, I still wasn't partaking in anything, but I think I was like, well, if I ever get into a relationship, it's fine because we love each other. And
Yeah.
I think now I'm like, no, I'm like, I want to be pure and holy just out of my respect and love for the Lord. And that looks different than other kids, other young adults my age. And so I think that is like, I guess I've had to die to myself and like maybe old thought patterns or
Yeah.
things like that, because you can still be dishonoring to the Lord
Right.
in your thoughts and your actions. And so I think it's like I used to, well, I'm not doing X, Y, and Z, but it's like I'm still doing these things, and that's not
Yeah.
honoring either. So I think just that it's over the years, it's been just a lot of refining of my thoughts. And it's like, you're either all in or you're all the way out. There's no in
Yeah.
between. Not that we're not going to um, fall because we're not perfect. I'm not perfect at all, but I think it's, um, now I'm not doing things because I was told to do them, but it's like I have my own relationship with the Lord, and that has definitely changed how I navigate things in my life. So,
Yeah, that's really good. I think this is so good just because you're able to give your perspective on sort of like, I guess, being able just to differentiate obviously the different cost and like the cost that it will have people, like whether it be their lifestyle or habits or thought patterns. So like for me, girl, it costed me. I think it for you it was your, those thought patterns or those habits, but for me it was like it definitely was like a habits, change and a thought pattern change, but I think also like I was, drinking and having sex and doing all the things. And I think one thing of like that comes to mind as you were talking of like, oh, well, what would it cost you? I think it's understanding why there is a cost. And I think for me that was the biggest thing because obviously I was doing these things and I was just like, oh, whatever, like I love God and I'm pursuing Christ and I didn't understand that these things were causing me harm. And
yeah.
I think that was one of the biggest changes for me when it came to lifestyle was like, oh, now that I'm on the other side of my yes, I see how anxious I was. Even if it was, I was having fun and I was doing whatever I wanted, like I saw how fearful I was. I saw how stressed I was. I saw how I lacked so much peace. I saw how I was always confused and didn't know what I was doing. And I thought that I would find satisfaction in all these things or find love in all these people or these guys that I was looking toward or looking for. And it's just like it's insane how your eyes really become open and aware, but your heart becomes aware of your actions when you say yes to him. Because
Right.
prior I was just like, oh, like, yeah, I love God and I read my Bible and I go to church and all these things, but I'm still living this life not
Yeah.
knowing the effects of it, not knowing the effects of the lifestyle that I'm choosing. And I think that when it comes to saying yes to Christ and like choosing to believe in him and believe that Jesus died on the cross for you, I think that's one thing to factor into the cost is your lifestyle because you can't, like, for me, I always say this, like I can't go back. Like I can't imagine myself doing these things again and like going back to that anxiety, going back to that fear, going back to that confusion and the chaos for some temporary satisfaction when I could have like an eternity of like pleasure. Like I can have an eternity of satisfaction essentially. And I think that's the word that comes to mind. It's temporary pleasure or eternal satisfaction. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think I don't know. I think for people at times you can look at a Christian believer's life and you can think like, oh, well, they've never struggled with this or they've
Yeah.
never dealt with that or they never had sex and they never drink. And if they haven't, then they haven't, but there's still like there is no measure to sin. Not one sin is greater than the other. And so I think you can have somebody who lived that way, but they were still in sin, or somebody who did, live a life that you're living now and you're drinking and you're having sex and you're trying to find all this satisfaction in all the wrong places. And I think for me, that's really where my story is at. Like, that's something that I had to factor into the cost of like, oh, I can't do this anymore. And I'm
Yeah.
still going to be tempted to because I've already dabbled in it, but like again, saying yes to him and being on the other side of it, it's opened my eyes and my heart to be like, oh, those things like hurt me. And there's reason why he didn't want us to partake. There's reason why he didn't want me to have sex before marriage and
Yeah.
all these things because I see the effects of it and I see what it did to my soul and what
Yeah.
it did to my spirit. And so now I don't know. That was so good. I think that's good being able to take like your perspective on lifestyle change in mine. And so that it's like not one person's cost is different than the other. Like you're still choosing to deny yourself, whether it be deny your thoughts, deny your flesh, or deny certain habits, like you're still
Yeah.
choosing to deny that part of you and say yes to Christ and follow him. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's really good. Wow.
No, I think that's really beautiful, and thank you for sharing that, Jackie, because I just think that regardless of what we've done in the past, and by no, I'm so far from perfect, but I think that's like the beauty of a relationship with the Lord is just like He is such a redeemer, and like He just redeems our stories. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
when I look at you and other friends, it's like all I see is like God's like grace and His mercy.
Yeah.
I can see the image of Him, and it's like I think how beautiful that we get to share. Like, this is where I was at, and like for
Yeah.
me, I was an extremely like angry person. Like,
Yeah.
I, hit things, people, and like said to people. And so I'm just so thankful that when people see me now, like that's not what they see. And it's not because of anything that I've done, but just
Right.
because of what the Lord has done through me. And I'm just, yeah, I'm just really thankful that when he sees us, he doesn't see brokenness, but he sees
Right.
his daughters and sons that he loves so much, and he just is willing to accept us with arms wide open. And I think the more that we choose him, the more that we surrender to him and pick up our cross daily, like our old selves really do die. And so like we said, not that we temptations don't still come or things aren't hard, but it's just like, God, I choose you. And things do become easier, but I think to, people that are non-believers that, not having sex or choosing not to have sex or get drunk can be um seem really weird and strange,
Yeah.
but it's like you said, like we know that those things are so temporary, and I'd rather have an eternal peace and satisfaction. And so
Yeah.
I'd rather people think I'm weird and but I have an internal peace. And so that's just something that is indescribable. And so
Yeah.
rather have that than an inner turmoil, because I've um, experienced both, and I know that peace through Jesus is
Yeah, that's good. I think one thing for me, especially when it comes to like saying yes to Christ, I think it's obviously like when you are on the other side, that's when you're able to experience that satisfaction, like genuine and true satisfaction. I think one thing of like when it comes to, obviously we're talking about like our lifestyle change and how now we know the difference, but I think knowing the difference comes after you say the yes, because when you say yes to him, you begin, one, you're not, your eyes, you're no longer blind to the things you once were blind to. Like your eyes are open and things become, things are revealed to you. But I think it's also like you begin to realize like how all these things that you looked for satisfaction and just lacked in so many ways. And
right.
I think that leads into like this next question or topic is like, what did you get in return? And I think when I think of that, I think saying yes, it isn't like obviously you saying yes sometimes you means you have to say no to other things. Like saying yes for me meant I had to say no to sex, I had to say no to drinking, I had to say no to anger, I had to say no to unforgiveness. Like I had to say no to all these things I struggled with. But what I got in return was I got peace, I got joy, I got patience and kindness. Like I was able to forgive. Like I no longer was angry, but I think one of the biggest things was like I got to have Christ. Like I got
Yeah.
Jesus in return.
Yeah.
And that's like the greatest thing that I could have gotten because I haven't experienced anything like him. And so I think it's, for people who've never heard or heard about it, it's like, oh, well, what it costs me, what do I get in return? Like all these things. And it's like, I didn't say yes because I expected to get all these great things. I said yes out of faith in him. And then
Yeah.
that's what I got in return. And I think
Yeah.
that like just what I've gotten to experience on the other side, it's so much more different than what my life was like before. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I guess if you can just kind of go into that of like your experience, obviously, because mine and yours are different, but I think at the end of the day, we said yes in faith to Christ. So what did you get in return?
I think my first thought was just peace. Like I said, I mean, I really was an anxious child. I was angry. I think in my own ways, like I just didn't even know who I was. Like my
Yeah.
identity was in school and sports, and I think even in just a relationship of like, oh,
Yeah.
once I meet him, that will define me or that
Yeah.
will make me feel better. And I think
Yeah.
even like putting my thoughts like before the Lord is like not honoring, or putting that before the Lord is not honoring. And I think even that creates a lot of inner turmoil. And so I think just what the Lord has given me, it's like one, he's extended a never-ending amount of grace to me that I just am so thankful for. But
Yeah.
two, like I have peace now, and it's like not that things still aren't hard, or I think we're humans, we experience different emotions, but it's like
Yeah.
I think I know what will fulfill me and what will sustain me um now. And so I think for me it's like I just lived an extremely like restless life, like always anxious, always worried, and that's tormenting in itself. And
Yeah.
so I think now just like the peace of the Lord of like, okay, um I know that he's good. I know that he's faithful. And so I think even just my thoughts before of like, well, I could cross this line. It's
Yeah.
like that's not good. I think that's not super honoring. And so um yeah, I even too like I just am thankful for the Lord's protection and hand over my life, because I see how things could have been different. And so, um, yeah, I think I just have a peace now that I didn't have before. So, but it's taken time to get there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I don't know. I think one thing, I guess, like in terms of saying yes and what it'll cost you, I think a lot of the times, like when you think of like a cost and when you think of like, oh, I'm gonna have to give these things up, right? I think a lot of it is like, is it he has to be worth it for you. Like it has to be something that you truly, truly want. And I think that was the biggest difference that I was able to see within myself is like I was able to see the difference between when I thought I wanted it and when my heart was like, oh no, yeah, this is what I want. Like I'm saying yes. Because, obviously like before it was just like, oh yes, I want him and I want to do all these things, but yet I wasn't willing to give anything up. Like I wasn't willing to stop doing anything. And I didn't
Yeah.
try to either. And I think that's one thing about who Jesus is. You know, last episode I talked about learning about who Jesus is because it obviously influences your yes, because you want to know who it is you're saying yes to.
Yeah.
And when I think of him in this way, I think he's so kind and so patient, and he gives you free will so that even when I was like, choosing to live in sin and trying to choose him, he gave me the time to figure it out. And it was like,
Yeah.
either you want me or you don't. And my life
Yeah.
showed it. My life showed that I didn't. And so I think now, like, that's one thing, I guess, to just give to the people listening. It's like, you have to be willing and you have to be ready because it will cost. Like, it will cost you things. You will have to give things up. But I think amidst the sanctification process and being pruned and having to cut things off and having to count your cost, like, you do really get something greater in return. And at the end of the day, like, the greatest part of it is that we get eternity in heaven with him, you know? And so even if the things cost you here on earth and, you know, there's suffering and there's all these things going on, like, you have a forever place. Like, you literally have a home to go to when it's all comes to an end. But I think as we get to the end of this episode, I think we can transition into why is it worth saying yes, even when it'll cost you? And I think I touched base on that just a little minute ago, going into my tangent. But I think because you get him, and that's really probably one of the greatest things that I've gotten to experience is who Jesus is
Yeah.
as my dad, as my friend, as my teacher, and everything else came with that. That's
Yeah.
whenever I got the peace. That's whenever I got the joy. That's whenever I began to grow in patience. That's when I was freed from unforgiveness and from anger. So, yeah. So, Sierra, why is it worth saying yes, even when it'll cost you?
I feel like having a relationship with the Lord, like it's everything. It means everything to me. But sometimes it feels hard to explain. Like, how do you
Yeah.
explain this to someone? Because drinking alcohol, drugs,
Yeah.
sex, all of
Yeah.
that feels good in the moment.
Yeah.
Like, but it is like how, you're putting your faith and trust in something that you can't see. And it's
Yeah.
like, how do you, and to like have received that, like having this faith, um, it's like that really does fulfill me. Like when I'm weary, the Lord gives rest. When I'm hungry, when I'm tired, when I don't know how I'm gonna make it, like He provides and all of that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I just feel like I can't even explain like the goodness and the sweetness of that because
Yeah.
it's like if someone would have told me like 3 years ago, well, Sierra, just die to yourself and
Yeah.
surrender, I'd be like,
Yeah.
I don't know what that means
Yeah.
or it's like, but I think sometimes it's just a constant, even verbalizing it through prayer, like, God, I choose you. I
Yeah.
submit to you. I submit X, Y, and Z to you. And so, um, I don't know. I just like it, you really gain everything. And I think you realize that, okay, all of these worldly things are not, even though they may feel good in the moment, it's not
Yeah.
gonna long-term satisfaction,
Yeah.
pleasure. Because I feel like even sometimes after like you experience like the enemy wants us to fall, and then after we sin or do whatever he wanted us to do, there is you feel shame and
Yeah.
guilt, frustration, and like all of that is not from the Lord. And
Yeah.
even in the moment, I don't know anyone who wakes up after a night of getting blackout drunk and is like, man, I love, I think the moment,
Yeah.
the drinks leading up
Yeah.
feel good, but waking up blackout drunk and with a headache, I don't know anyone who's like, okay, I'm ready. Let's go again. And so,
Yeah. I think one of the things that comes to mind, and I was thinking about this a couple months ago, but it's like it's not everlasting. Like it's not an
yeah,
everlasting feeling. And I think that's one thing, even to that example, it's like you can go to these things and yes, they're great in the moment, but the next day you still wake up with anxiety. The next day you
yeah,
still have a lot of anger. The next day you're still anxious. Like the next day you're still worried, you're still doubtful, you still feel a lot of shame. You still feel like you're not worthy. Like yeah, it works in the moment whether you're running to sex, alcohol, whatever it is you're running to.
whatever it is. Yeah,
It can be the most simplest things, whether it's like an unhealthy thought pattern or you're super
yeah,
hard on yourself or negative. Like you still it still does nothing. It's like it's a band-aid, to a bigger and deeply rooted problem. But yeah, I think that is really good, and I think a really good way to end this episode. um I think the conversation was honestly really fruitful. I think it was cool just getting to do like different perspectives, obviously from like what my yes looked like to what your yes looked like in terms of what it costed us. um
yeah,
but yeah, I think it is something really hard to explain, and I think that's why I always tell people like I can't explain it. Really, I can't put it into words what
yeah,
Jesus means to me or what he's done. Like you just have to experience it. So I guess that's my encouragement today to anyone listening, or even if you're already a believer or you are trying to decide where you're at. I think saying yes to him does come with costs and it does come with challenges, and life isn't this easy thing, but he's your peace amidst all the chaos, and he's the one that gives you strength to deny yourself from going to your old ways or old habits and really truly loving him and seeking him and wanting to lead a life that honors him. So thank
yeah,
you so much, Sierra,
yeah.
for being on this episode. Thank you for giving your insight. It was so, so good. And I'm so glad that you're able to join today. And thank you guys for listening. And I'm excited for these next episodes to come where we continue to talk about your yes and what it means to say yes, but not only to say yes, but to be on the other side of your yes, whether that comes to getting to know Christ, knowing who you are in him, bearing his image, and like today's episode, what it'll cost you. So thank you guys again. Y'all have a good one. Bye.
Bye.